Good evening, guys. I'm Chris, and welcome back to another episode of Rift Amps. Back on the AMPEG, and I've had a good think over the weekend about this cap. It certainly looks poorly, but it's still performing as it should, or at least as far as I can test in circuit, which is odd. So I think what I want to do is pull the cap out, give it a good inspection, test it on the bench, and then see if we can work out exactly what's going on there. But it hasn't exploded, so it hasn't truly popped, has it? But it doesn't look right, so we need to work out what's going on. But I can't yet give an answer as to why the output stage is performing as though it should do if that cap was indeed faulty, which is bizarre. So anyway, let's get this cap pulled out and tested. Q&A time. Right, lots and lots of interesting comments and questions that have come through. Sorry if I didn't pick your question this week. I try and keep these videos to 20-25 minutes long. I can't do all the questions. Some of them are very similar, so if you've asked a question that's similar to someone else's, I might just choose to answer one of those instead of both. You know how it works by now. Anyway, Rick MB6961 says, do you recall the voltage reading on the heaters of the JCM 900? I've seen one of them with 7.3 volts or so. Yes, the heaters were 6.4 as I measured them, but my mains voltage was high that day, so pretty much bang on. If you've got an amp where your heaters are at over 7 volts, you really need to be looking into fixing that, because you can very quickly burn those valves up. So with the cap removed from the chassis, we can see it's a Ducati 50 microfarad at 50 or 60 volts. So that will be 50 volts working voltage, and that will be 60 volts peak. The negative or common end looks okay, but it's this positive end that certainly looks like something weird is going on. So we'll start with our cheap tester. On the 200 microfarad range. We're just going to see if we can get a capacitance measurement on this cap. 80.4 microfarads. So it's out of spec anyway. So 20% would be 60 microfarads. So it's well over 60%. It's well over, 20% tolerance. So even if it if it didn't have this end popping out, I would still recommend replacement on it anyway, even though it hasn't physically failed. Let's get the high voltage tester on it and see what we get. Channel member, my name was Techno. As most of you will know now, that if you are a channel member, not only do you get to see these videos sooner than everyone else, you also get priority in getting your questions answered. So if you see a lot of the same people getting their questions answered, it's because they're channel members. Anyway, he says, interesting video as always. A design question for you. When designing an amplifier, what is your process for selecting the speaker that you are going to use in terms of voicing? Do you tend to have a good idea of what you will choose when you are in the planning stage? Or do you audition a few options as the prototype is nearing completion? Thanks again for the great content and for sharing your knowledge and experience. Okay, there are many different ways to choose a speaker, but it's often worth having a good think about what a speaker is, or more importantly, what it is doing to the sound. Okay, so as guitarists, we focus a lot on our tone. That's a journey that we're all on. We're constantly trying to improve our tone, you know, and just constantly trying to improve and make things better, and make sound better. I want more tone, I want more sustain, I want richer mids, I want a firmer bottom end, I want, you know, spark, whatever it is. We're constantly trying to improve our tone. And some people are trying to create their own tone and their own sound, and go down that path of exploration. And other people are trying to recreate someone else's tone, which is equally valid. And if that's what you want to do, fantastic, right? So we're all on this tonal journey. Now, we worry about what material the nut is made from on our guitar. We worry about tuning stability and what tuning pegs we use. We worry about fret size and width and material. We worry about string gauge. We focus on pickup magnets and pickup wire gauge and pot values and tone cap values on the guitar. We worry about bridge styles and designs. We focus on ash versus older bodies, mahogany versus maple, rosewood versus maple or ebony. That's just the guitar, right? Then we worry about, you know, use high quality cables, and we look at, you know, trying to find the best guitar pedal we've got. Then we focus on the amplifier itself and all the components inside and construction methods and all these things. Now, all of those things, including your fingernails, affect your resulting sound. And we know this because we've all been down that path, right? But what single component affects all of that? It's the speaker. And the reason it's the speaker is because that's the last thing in the chain before our ears. Okay? So everything before that goes through that speaker. And the best way I've heard it explained to me, and I think this is absolutely brilliant, is that the speaker itself, because they're not transparent, they do have their own voice. It's like a master EQ being applied, or a global EQ being applied to the master track in a recording session. Everything goes through it. So that speaker affects the tone and the sound of everything before it, because all of that is passing through the speaker. And therefore, it's super, super important. And some amp builders and designers will say the speaker can easily, on its own, be 25 to 35% of the resulting tone just by itself. That's how important, how critical to the overall voicing and resulting tone of your sound that speaker is. Okay, are you with me so far? So when it comes to designing an amplifier, what do you do? Well, I discovered something when I used to be really into photography, digital and analog photography. And when you are editing a photograph, like in Photoshop, for example, you're selecting all your colours and your highlight and contrast balance and all that sort of thing. But if you're going to have that image printed onto photographic paper, you need to know how that photographic paper is going to change and affect the final colours. So you might be doing reds and oranges, for example, but on certain photographic paper, that might change that tone ever so slightly, that colour tone ever so slightly. And if you know what that photographic paper is going to do to your colours, you can then adjust for that beforehand. Do you see where I'm going with this? Okay, so I apply the same thought process as that to my guitar amplifiers. So I say, right, here's a speaker that I know what its EQ curve looks like. I know that it pushes certain frequencies, it pulls certain frequencies, it's got quite a wide Q at certain points, it's all those things. I know what that speaker sounds like and I know what it does. Therefore, if I choose that speaker from the beginning, I can design everything before it to work and optimize with that speaker. Cool? Right. That's the ideal world. So if you're doing a brand new build, for a brand new circuit that no one's ever heard before, that's what you do. You start with the speaker and work backwards and optimize everything to go through that final EQ stage, EQ filter. But obviously you can't always do that. You might be working on, you might be building an amplifier for someone that's already a known quantity, like these 57 Tweeds. They are 5E3 Tweed Deluxes that I'm just doing my own thing on. But it's still going to be in the ballpark of a really, really good 5E3. It's not going to sound like a 50-watt Marshall, for example. It's going to be a Tweed Deluxe, right? That's the area it's going to sit. And so when it comes to choosing a speaker on these, yes, sometimes you do have to try a few to see what you think works best with that circuit. But then the good designer will combine the both. We'll combine the two. So from these, we're doing a choice of a Celestium Blue or the limited edition Celestium 100 Silver Alnico. And once these things are up and running and burnt in and the speaker is broken in, then I can make that final decision, say, actually, now I've heard the whole package, do I need to go back and tweak something? Is the bottom end too bassy or is it too tight? Are the mids flat or are they too scooped? Or is there more detail in there that I know I can unlock? What about the top end? Is the front end of the note too sharp and spiky, or is it too rounded? Is there a percussive quality to it that's either really desirable or not? There's so much stuff. So it's really tricky, but I always say to people, if you're doing a brand new build, start at the end, work your way backwards. But if you're working with a known quantity, try something that try and find a speaker that gets you 99% of the way there, and then do those final adjustments to optimize it afterwards. But yeah, what a great question. I hope that all makes sense to you. It's been 9.5 minutes of me waffling, so hopefully you all understood. Right, so I've got the Heathkit condenser checker hooked up to the cap, as you can see. This is, I can't remember what model this is. Is it a C3? Can't remember. But it's a high voltage tester. A lot of people will know Heathkit stuff, but for this sort of work, it's absolutely brilliant. So I can test values of capacitors and resistors, and I can also check leakage up to 450 volts DC, which is interesting. Very helpful. Anyway, so we'll just check that this tester confirms what the Chinese one does. So I've got it in electrolytic mode. We're going to be testing capacitance. Now, it's a 50 microfarad cap, but the Chinese tester measured it at 80. So we've got it on the 20 to 1000 range, and 80 is around here on the dial. So when the eye opens, and hopefully you can see the eye, at its widest point, which is around there, adjust the power factor slightly. about there. That's where it's most accurate, and that's saying just over 70. So yeah, we're about, if you see how it's open. I need to service this to get this brighter, but you can see. So its capacitance measures the same on this piece of equipment as it does on my Chinese cap tester. Good news so far. So let's do a leakage test. Now, it's a 50 volt cap, and the only option I've got now is 25 volts. I can't test it at 150 because I'll definitely pop that cap if I do that. So then we'll check it on 25, and what we're expecting to see is the eye to close, and then if it's good, it will immediately open back to where it is. So let's see if we can get you a nicer view. Yeah, okay, 25 volts. So there's now 25 volts DC across that cap, and it's still showing, or testing, there's no leakage. Okay, so it's passed that test. It'd be nice to test it at 50 volts, but I can't do that on this tester. But I want to do a further visual inspection on this cap to see what we end up with. Fuzz Nerd says, really like seeing your wiring and build method on this one. He was talking, well, that's a comment on the bank holiday special video that I was doing on Ed's custom build. He asked, why are you using Belton preamp sockets and ceramic for your octals? Okay, really good question. I have actually covered this on the channel before, but ceramics are much more capable of withstanding high temperatures than the Beltons are. So for the high temperature valves, the output valves and the rectifier valve, I prefer to use ceramic sockets. That's why I don't use the Beltons for those. But I do prefer the Beltons for the preamp valves because the two-piece ceramic 9-pin sockets can actually rattle and cause buzzing and rattling inside the amplifier, which is incredibly frustrating and can be difficult to hunt down. So I prefer to use Beltons simply for their heat capability. Now, it's only fair that I give you the downsides of using ceramic sockets. And the downside of ceramic sockets is that if the amplifier ever gets dropped, and I mean not just a light drop, I mean a proper drop, you know, from a height, falls off the back of a touring van or something like that, there is a risk that those ceramic sockets will crack and they will then need replacing. But to be fair, if your amplifier has fallen off the back of a truck, it's going to need more than a few valve sockets anyway. So, you know, that's the downside of ceramics. They, under extreme shock, they can crack, and you do see it. But their heat rejection and their ability to withstand the heat of the valves is far superior to what are the Beltons made of? I've gone blank. I don't want to say plastic. It's I'll look it up. But yeah, that's that. He said, Fuzznerd also says, why are the cap cans going underneath the board? Would that make servicing them more difficult down the road? Well, more difficult than them being out in the open, yes, of course. But if you've ever worked on any Marshall since the 60s that had filter cans under the board, you're more than capable of replacing them. It's not difficult. It just takes time and a little bit of patience, but it's perfectly easy to do. It's all part of the course. So nothing really to worry about. It's one of those things that people think is much more of an issue than it really is. It's just, you know, we do them all the time. They're not tricky. Right, so it performs just as well outside of the chassis as it does inside. And my only cause of concern is why the end cap appears to be popping off. Now, these are not particularly special capacitors. They're not unique. They're not rare. And it's, you know, if it was if it had popped, I'd be replacing it regardless, right? So I'm going to make the call that, well, to replace this cap anyway, even though I've now proved that it's still performing as it should, although it has gone way over spec. So I'm going to cut off the outside sleeve so we can give this thing a closer inspection. Here we go then. So here's the cap removed from its blue casing, just plastic that, and we can clearly see that this end cap, which is made of feels like rubber, has just popped out. Just popped out of the casing, but inside that capacitor looks all good. Nothing wrong with that. It's just the weather sealing cap on the end. It's just worked its way off. Could be heat that's done that, could be a number of things. But this cap, apart from its value being too high, was all good. Is all good. But we're going to replace it anyway. I'm certainly not going to mess around trying to get this back in. I wonder how long it's been like that for. But electrically, or sorry, that cap has not exploded or popped or anything like that. The other end perfectly intact, look. So nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about at all. The only issue, really, the only thing that's wrong with that cap, as far as circuit performance is concerned, is that it's no longer 50 microfarad. Right, we'll get another one soldered in. Rodney Croach 2921, I think it's Croach, apologise if I've got the pronunciation wrong. Totally unrelated, he says, but do you use solder wick braid? If so, what brand type do you find to be the best? I don't use it regularly because I don't have a need to use it regularly. Most of the stuff I'm doing, I've got my Japanese solder sucker that works brilliantly well, although lately less so. So I think it's time to get a new one. But solder wick braid, yes, I do have some, and I only use it on obviously on PCB stuff, and I really, even then, only go to use it when I can tell. You just know if those traces are going to lift if you use a solder sucker. So I don't know what brand it is. I bought a roll of it years and years and years ago. I can't remember what it is now. It's probably RS or similar, I would have thought. But I rarely use it. But it does work quite well for certain applications. Okay, new cap in place. And she's doing exactly the same 13.2, 13.6, 13.5 volts into 8 ohms, which is 22.8 watts. So all running good so far. Still need to swap out this bulb here and just go through the rest of the amp, make sure it's all good. But apart from that, she's running great. Running absolutely wonderful. So yeah, turns out there's absolutely nothing to be concerned about. Isn't that interesting? Okay, bias time for the AMPEG. So I've taken some measurements with the amp fully warmed up, running for roughly half an hour. Remember, for biasing we want Ohm's law, V equals IR, and Joule's law, which is power, is voltage times current. Okay, so voltage anode to cathode is 367 volts on one side, and it's 366.5 on the other. So very, very close. Voltage cathode to ground, so that's across the cathode resistor, 28.5 volts. and the resistance, the value of the cathode resistor is 249 ohms. So for our cathode current, we want to do current is voltage divided by resistance, so 28.5 divided by 249 ohms gives us 114 milliamps. 114, so 0.14 amps. Okay. Divide by 2 because there are 2 valves. Means we're running 0.057 amps per 6L6 times that number, because now we're on to Joule's law. We want to do, for power, we want to do voltage times current, or you can go current times voltage, the same thing, 367. So that times 367 gives us a plate dissipation, a plate and screen dissipation of 21 watts. Now, if these are modern 6L6s, there'll be 30 watts maximum. So we're at 70%. If they are old style 6L6s, there'll be 23 watts, which puts us at 91%. Either way, this is actually a very conservatively biased amplifier, and it does put out its rated output. Or does it? Are these meant to be 30 watts? One moment, please. Johnny TT8ZC says, plane is coming along nicely. I'm thinking of doing a B-24 for the World War II extended build. Maybe as the Strawberry Bitch, which was in North Africa and supposedly took part in the raid on Palesti, Romania. Think you're on the wrong channel. Yeah. No idea what you're talking about. Yep, so the cathode biased B15s are rated for 25 watts output, and this one's doing 23, so we're close enough. The output valves, 6L6s, are 6L6 GCs. Hopefully you can see that on there, which are 30 watts. So we're running at 70% dissipation, which is arguably quite cool for a cathode biased amplifier. But as you can see, there's zero crossover distortion on the output, and it's probably why these have lasted for so long, because they're so under stress. So I could try bumping up those numbers, putting a 220 ohm, go to the next D12 value, but do you know what? I don't think we need to. I think this amp is running beautifully. It's incredibly understressed. Yeah, nothing to worry about. So the other sum we can do, while I'm thinking about it, is so that cathode bypass cat would have 29, call it 29 volts across it. It was rated for 50. So yeah, nicely understressed as well. The only thing is one more Joule's law sum, which is for the value of the cathode bias resistor, which is a 250 ohm, looks like a 10 watt. Yeah, 10 watt. So power is voltage times current, so the voltage across it, 28.5 times 0.114, 3.25 watts of heat dissipation, divided by 10 watts. Yeah, easy enough to calculate. So that resistor is only dissipating 33% of its maximum. Again, massively overbuilt. Lots of headroom electrically in this anyway. Nothing to worry about. So now, I need to go through, tighten everything up. The cap can that's a bit wobbly, it's just the mounts, just the twist mounts. So I'm just going to tighten those up, tighten up all the nuts and bolts, give it a final service, and then a good old long soak test. The only thing that I need to do is check that the coupling caps aren't leaking. Now, I haven't measured any leakage so far. They've all been perfect, but I need to give this thing a super long soak test and go back and recheck just in case. Stick a new bulb in it. Pack this thing up. Fuzz Nerd again says, my important amp building question is, what sort of coffee do I drink? Well, don't get me started on coffee. I am a full-on coffee enthusiast. Right, so currently I'm going through a bit of a mocha phase, especially in the morning. So if I go to one of the takeaway coffee shops, it's usually a mocha at the moment. But here in the workshop, I really like Italian roasts at the moment. That seems to be my thing. I seem to always edge towards Italian roasted coffees. I always buy in beans, usually from a small boutique local supplier or something like that, or distributor. Grow my own, and I use an AeroPress. If you want to go into AeroPresses, I've tried both the normal and the inverted method. And I agree with Hoffman that there is no taste difference between those two methods. So I just use the normal method. Good paper filter, nice freshly ground Italian roast, and yeah, that's my go-to coffee. So, but I could talk about coffee all day long. For some of you don't know, I gave up alcohol 14 years ago now. It's 14 years in August. So, and when I stopped drinking, I moved on to coffee because I always have to be into something, right? So coffee became my beverage of choice, and I always go deep. So yeah, that's my thing. But yeah, great question. Thanks. Well, that's it then, guys. Thank you very much for watching once again. As always, please give this video a thumbs up, all your comments and questions down below, subscribe, join the channel, and I will catch you all at the next one.